Hey guys, I hope you're having a great week. Looking forward to week 4 of our Radical Bible Study coming up this coming Monday night. And this is where it's going to get a little bit tough. I know what some of you are thinking if it hasn't been tough before. This is Psalm 67. And so this coming week, if you could read the 67th Psalm, which essentially says that the reason we are blessed, to any degree that we are blessed, is so that we can pass that blessing on to others. And so we have been blessed with the gospel and with everything that God has given us for the express purpose of making him more widely known and loved and made much of on a global scale. And what that means, the bottom line of that, is that you and I were created for a global purpose. We weren't created just to make our mark on the kingdom here in Central Maryland, but all the way around the world. Psalm 67 gives us that picture. And yet when we contrast it with sort of the picture of evangelicalism in the United States, we see really a stark contrast. I'll give you just a few numbers so you get a picture of what this looks like. In 2009, evangelical Christians gave $12 billion, roughly $12 billion, to churches in North America. 98% of that money never left the shores of the United States of America. By contrast, just in our own denomination, there are 16 million individuals that claim affiliation with a church that itself is affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention, and yet we only have just a little over 5,000 missionaries abroad, and so that is 1/10,000th of 1%. I believe that's how it works out mathematically, of all Southern Baptists. So the bottom line is this: we are called, on the one hand, to a global purpose and a global impact. On the other hand, we keep 98% of our money and 99.99999% of our personnel in an area of the world where only 5% of the global population resides. And this is a problem. Part of that is, I think, the fact that we've grown accustomed to seeing missions as a calling rather than as a command. Many people will say, I'm not really called to missions. And I understand in a sense what they mean by that. I'm called, for example, to ministry, and specifically to vocational ministry as a pastor and as a denominational servant. Not everyone is called to that role, but everyone, whether they're a doctor or an engineer or a plumber or whatever they're doing with their life vocationally, is called to accomplish the Great Commission, and they're called to do that on a global scale. And the fact of the matter is, we, most of the time, are only reaching people who are most like us. The problem is, most of the people in the world are not like you and me. They don't look like us. They don't talk the same language as us. In fact, if you could take the global population and compact it down to 1,000 people, only 52 of those individuals would live in North America. 584 would be Asian. 124 would be of African descent. 84% would be, or 84 out of 1,000 would be from Latin America. 55 would live in the former Soviet bloc countries. 165 would speak Mandarin Chinese, while by contrast, only 86 would speak English. And 900 of that group of 1,000 people would be lost and on their way to an eternity without Jesus Christ. That's the harvest that God has called us to reach. And every time I think about statistics like that, I think about the story in John chapter 4 where Jesus is taking his disciples through a place that they really don't want to go. It's a place called Samaria. If you don't know the history behind this area called Samaria, it goes back about 800 years before the time of Jesus. 722 BC, the Assyrian armies laid siege to the northern kingdom of Israel, and they scattered 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel to the farthest reaches of the earth, and they intermarried with and had children with those that were left behind. And that basically formed a new ethnicity, and those people were called the Samaritans. Well, the Jews didn't like the Samaritans. They were considered beneath them. They really didn't want to reach them. And yet, in John chapter 4, Jesus takes his disciples purposefully through Samaria, meets with a woman there of very loose reputation, breaks almost every social code in the Jewish handbook in his attempts to reach out to her and present himself to her. And then at the end of John chapter 4 comes this amazing verse, in verse 35. He looks at his disciples and he says, "Open your eyes, because the fields are white unto harvest." What's interesting is what he was talking about. He was talking about a place that the disciples didn't want to go. They were trying to harvest in one place, and Jesus was saying, hey guys, the harvest is here. It's right here in front of you. And one of the principles that comes out of that story is that most of the time, if we don't see the harvest, It's probably because we're not looking for it. So with that in mind, just a few questions that I want to ask you in anticipation of this week. Again, read chapter 3 of the book Radical, and read and meditate on the 67th Psalm, and then ask yourself this question: where is your harvest? Where is that harvest that maybe you've been ignoring? Who are those people? Where is that place? And then secondly, what are you going to do in order to engage that harvest? What are you going to do in order to engage that harvest? There are 4.5 billion lost people in the world. And if you just took the people who claim to follow Jesus in North America and divided them among that population, each one of us would only need to present the gospel to 45 people in our lifetime in order to reach the global population. Something's not right here. So who's that harvest? What is that part of the world where God intends for you to make a global impact, and how will you begin that process? Think about those things this week. Pray over how God would have you to respond to His calling on your life to obey the Great Commission, and I look forward to talking with you about it this coming Monday night at 6:30. God bless.